Hello, welcome back and thank you for watching Betrayed Husbands Club. We appreciate each and every one of you. We'd like to know, what part of the world are you watching us from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1: Foundations and Fractures. Ethan Monroe clutched the construction blueprints in his rough, calloused hands, closely examining the finer details of Monroe Construction's newest endeavor. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of his office at the Monroe family estate, a place where the legacy of his ancestors had been carefully built over generations. At 35, Ethan carried himself with the assurance of someone who had earned his place, not through inheritance, but through his own hard work and merit. "Mr. Monroe, your father's here to see you," came Sarah's voice over the intercom. "Send him in," Ethan responded, rolling up the blueprints. Gavin Ellison Monroe entered the office, his commanding presence still strong despite his advancing years. "Is that the community center project?" he asked, nodding toward the plans. "Yes, we're just finalizing the foundation specs. The soil composition is presenting some challenges, but we'll manage it," Ethan replied. He unfolded another set of drawings. "Here, take a look at these structural changes I'm suggesting." Gavin carefully examined the plans, a proud smile forming on his weathered face. "You've always had an eye for this, son. Even when you were little, you'd spend hours on construction sites with me, while Dylan—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Speaking of Dylan, have you seen the latest marketing proposals?" Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "The budget looks inflated. Your brother has his own way of handling things," Gavin said, carefully choosing his words. "Maybe you should take it up with him directly." "I've tried. He deflects, makes excuses about market research and focus groups," Ethan replied, pacing behind his desk. "The numbers don't add up, Dad. Something's off." A knock interrupted their conversation. Dylan Monroe entered without waiting for an invitation, his designer suit and perfectly styled hair standing in stark contrast to Ethan's more practical attire. "No family meeting without me?" Dylan's smile was thin, not quite reaching his eyes. "I just had lunch with the mayor. He's excited about the community center project. We were discussing the marketing budget," Ethan said bluntly. "Care to explain why we need $100,000 for market penetration analysis?" Dylan waved his hand dismissively. "You wouldn't understand. Marketing isn't just about putting up billboards anymore. We need sophisticated data analytics, focus groups, social media campaigns." Ethan cut him off. "I understand numbers perfectly. What I don't understand is why our marketing expenses have tripled since you took over the department." "Boys," Gavin intervened, sensing the tension. "This isn't the time. We've got the charity gala tonight. Your mother expects both of you there, presenting a united front." Ethan noticed Dylan absent-mindedly checking his phone, his thumbs rapidly typing across the screen. "Hot date tonight, little brother?" Ethan teased. "I'm just coordinating with Sierra about the gala presentations," Dylan replied smoothly. "She's been key in organizing everything." The mention of his brother's wife made Ethan pause. He hadn't thought much about Sierra's increasing time at the office lately, especially with her claiming that the charity event needed her attention. He had been too focused on the community center project to give it proper thought. "How is Sierra?" Gavin asked. "We've missed her at Sunday dinners." "Busy," Ethan responded shortly. "The gala's been taking up a lot of her time." Dylan's phone buzzed again. "Speaking of which, I should head back to marketing. We're finalizing the presentation slides." Before Ethan could press him further about the budget, Dylan was already slipping out the door. Gavin watched him leave, then turned to Ethan. "Don't be too hard on him, son. Not everyone has your dedication to the technical side of the business." "This isn't about tech versus creative, Dad," Ethan replied. "Something's off. I can feel it." Later that afternoon, Ethan walked through the marketing department, nodding to employees who quickly averted their eyes. Through the glass walls of Dylan's office, he spotted his brother and Sierra huddled together over a laptop, their heads bent close as they laughed. Sierra's hand lingered on Dylan's shoulder just a little too long. Ethan stood frozen, his stomach knotting with discomfort. He couldn't help but think back to their childhood, when he and Dylan had been inseparable. When had everything changed? When had his brother become a stranger to him? His phone vibrated, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a text from Julian King, the family accountant. Need to discuss some irregularities in the marketing department's expense reports. Urgent. Ethan quickly replied. My office, 30 minutes. He took one last look at Dylan's office. Sierra was gathering her things, still smiling at whatever private joke they had shared. She didn't notice him standing there as she walked out. The foundation of trust that Ethan had so carefully built his life upon was beginning to crack, with small, hairline fractures spreading through the structure of his world. But unlike the buildings he meticulously constructed, these weakening supports couldn't be reinforced with steel and concrete. In his office, Ethan pulled up the company's financial records. Numbers don't lie. People do. He muttered under his breath, determined to uncover what his brother and wife were hiding. The intercom buzzed again. Mr. King is here to see you. Send him in, Ethan said, straightening in his chair, bracing himself for whatever revelations would follow. He was Gavin Monroe's son, after all, and his father had taught him that in business, as in life, problems had to be faced head-on. The door opened, and Julian entered, clutching a thick folder of documents. One glance at the accountant's face told Ethan everything he needed to know. His instincts had been right. Something was very wrong at Monroe Construction, and he was going to get to the bottom of it, no matter what it took. Close the door, Julian, Ethan commanded, his voice steady with determination. Show me everything. Why would they need? Ethan stopped mid-sentence, his hand tightening on the papers until they crumpled in his grip. There's more, Julian continued, his voice steady. The charges are listed twice, once under business expenses and again under client entertainment. Double billing the company and trying to hide the actual dates of stay, Ethan muttered. How long has this been going on? At least 6 months that I can trace definitively. But there are patterns, Julian replied, glancing down at the documents. Ethan slammed the papers down on the desk. Give me everything, every receipt, every charge. Every time they've... He trailed off, taking a deep breath. The ceremony starts in an hour. We'll deal with this afterward. At the construction site, local media had gathered for the groundbreaking ceremony. Gavin stood proudly at the podium, delivering a speech about Monroe Construction's ongoing commitment to community development. Ethan scanned the crowd, his eyes falling on Dylan and Sierra near the refreshment table. They were standing too close, exchanging what seemed like an inside joke. Dylan's hand brushed across Sierra's lower back in a gesture that felt unnecessarily intimate. Ethan observed as his wife leaned in, whispering something in Dylan's ear, her lips nearly brushing his skin. Mr. Monroe? A reporter approached Ethan, microphone in hand. Can you tell us about the innovative features planned for the community center? Ethan forced himself to focus, slipping into his professional persona. The design includes sustainable materials and energy-efficient systems that will serve as a model for future development in Willow Creek. Throughout the interview, Ethan kept Dylan and Sierra in his peripheral vision. They had slightly separated by now, maintaining a facade of professional distance, but their body language told a different story, one of shared secrets and concealed desires. The ceremony concluded with the official groundbreaking, with photographs of city officials and Monroe Construction executives holding golden shovels. Ethan posed for the cameras, smiling tightly through clenched teeth. Later that evening, Ethan sat in their bedroom, waiting for Sierra to return. When she finally walked in, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly tousled, she said, The ceremony went well, avoiding Ethan's gaze as she removed her jewelry. Everyone seemed impressed with the presentation. I saw you today, Ethan said softly. With Dylan. Sierra froze for a moment, before continuing with her bedtime routine. We were working with the marketing team. Ethan's voice cut through her excuses like a knife. Don't. Your phone. Give it to me. What? That's ridiculous. I'm not going to. The software update last week, Ethan interrupted. It backed up your messages. He stood up, stepping toward her. All of them, Sierra? Every single one. The color drained from her face. Ethan, I can explain. Explain what? The hotel rooms? The late-night meetings? Ethan laughed, but the sound was hollow. The messages about how much you love him. How I don't understand you the way he does. It's not what you think. She tried to protest. It's exactly what I think, Ethan said, pulling out his phone and opening a document. May 15th, Riverside Inn. June 3rd, Lakeview Hotel. July 21st. Stop it! Tears were streaming down her face now. You're acting crazy. Crazy? Ethan's voice remained calm, eerily steady. Crazy is betraying your husband with his own brother. Crazy is stealing from the company to fund your little affair. We never meant to. To what? Get caught? Ethan moved closer, his form towering over her. How long, Sierra? How long have you been sleeping with my brother? She backed up until her back hit the wall. Please, Ethan. We can work this out. We can get counseling, try to. There's nothing to work out, he said, turning away from her, disgust evident in every movement. Pack your things. Get out of my house. You can't just throw me out. She protested. I have rights, she continued, her voice shaky. Rights? Ethan spun around, his expression intense and cold. You want to talk about rights? Fine. Let's talk about them tomorrow, in the company boardroom, with our lawyers present. I'm sure the board will be very interested to hear about how you and Dylan have been embezzling funds. You wouldn't dare, she hissed, her voice trembling. It would destroy the company's reputation. Try me. Ethan's voice was ice. 1 hour, Sierra. Anything you leave behind gets thrown out. He stalked out of the room, ignoring her desperate sobs. In his study, he poured himself a drink and made a call. Julian? Execute Protocol Alpha. Full audit of the marketing department, effective immediately. And contact our attorneys first thing in the morning. He paused, staring at the family photos on his desk. One more thing. Call security. Have them revoke Dylan and Sierra's access to all Monroe construction properties. Tonight. The next morning, Ethan sat in the boardroom, flanked by the company's legal team. Gavin and Marcusine sat at the far end, their faces etched with shock and sorrow. When Dylan and Sierra entered, they were met by armed security guards stationed at the doors. What's going on? Dylan demanded, trying to keep up his usual air of confidence. Ethan nodded to Julian, who handed out thick folders to everyone present. This, Ethan said, his voice cutting through the tense silence, is evidence of your betrayal, both personal and professional. As the board members opened their folders, gasps and whispers filled the room. Dylan's face went pale as he saw the extent of the documentation: bank statements, hotel receipts, text messages, surveillance photos. You had us followed? Sierra whispered, horrified. I protected my interests, Ethan said coldly, not moving from his seat. Which is more than I can say for either of you. He continued, his gaze fixed firmly on them. You were too busy playing boss. Dylan sneered, though his voice wavered. Sierra needed someone who could keep up with her ambitions. Ambitions? Ethan raised an eyebrow. Is that what you call stealing from our family's company? You never understood me. Sierra spat, grabbing Dylan's hand defiantly. You were content to let life pass you by while we built something real. Gavin slammed his hand onto the table. Something real? You've destroyed this family, both of you. The board will vote this afternoon on your immediate termination. Ethan announced, his tone impassive and businesslike. Criminal charges are also being considered. But before they could respond, he pulled out one last document. Sierra, you'll find divorce papers in front of you. Sign them. Ethan's voice was sharp, his eyes cold. And if I refuse? Then I'll make every hotel, every restaurant, every place you two use company funds to carry out your affair public record. His smile was dangerously thin. I'm sure your social circle would love those details. A heavy silence filled the boardroom as Sierra picked up the pen, her fingers trembling. Dylan watched helplessly as she signed away her marriage, her position, and her reputation. Get out, Ethan commanded once she finished. Both of you. Security will escort you from the building. As they were escorted out, Marquezine broke down into tears. Gavin moved to comfort his wife, looking far older than he had just hours earlier. Son, Gavin began, but Ethan cut him off, his voice firm. The community center project needs my attention, Ethan said, straightening his tie. Julian, have legal prepare statements for the press. Keep it professional. Corporate restructuring, mutual separation, nothing more. Ethan walked out of the boardroom, his footsteps echoing through the halls of the building his ancestors had created. His personal foundation had cracked, but he would rebuild it, stronger, harder, without room for weakness or betrayal. Back in his office, he looked out over the city his family had helped shape. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You'll regret this, brother. We're not finished. Ethan deleted the message without replying. They were finished. He would make sure of it. Chapter 3: The Crucible of Resilience. 6 weeks after the confrontation in the boardroom, Ethan sat alone in his office at midnight, surrounded by project files and financial reports. The betrayal had turned his workspace into a command center for damage control. Spreadsheets covered his desk, each one unveiling another layer of Dylan and Sierra's deception. A knock at the door interrupted his concentration. Julian Mosley entered, holding a new stack of documents. More irregularities? Ethan asked without looking up from his computer. Different this time, Julian said, placing a folder in front of him. They've started a competing firm. Already secured 3 contracts that were supposed to be ours. Ethan opened the folder, scanning the contents. They're undercutting our bids by 20%. How? That's not all. Julian hesitated. Sierra's pregnant. Ethan snapped the pen in his hand, ink splattering across the papers. He stood abruptly, turning toward the window, his mind racing. How far along? He asked, his voice tight. Months, according to the medical records our investigators found, Julian replied. Simple math tells us the child was conceived while you and Sierra were still married. While she was in your bed, planning a future with you. Mr. Monroe? Julian's voice was tentative. There's more. They've been contacting our suppliers, trying to negotiate exclusive contracts. Let them try, Ethan said, his expression hardening. He turned back to Julian, his voice steady. Get me a meeting with the board tomorrow morning. It's time to implement some changes. After Julian left, Ethan made an unexpected call. Ms. Reed? I need your expertise on something urgent. Elena Reed, a corporate attorney and recent addition to Ethan's inner circle, arrived within the hour. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never lost a case. Corporate espionage, she said after reviewing the files. Plus breach of contract, violation of non-compete clauses. We can bury them in litigation. Not enough, Ethan said, pacing the room. They're using our own playbook against us. Dylan knows our strategies, our weaknesses. Then we change the game, Elena replied, pulling out her laptop. Your company's bylaws give the CEO extraordinary powers during times of crisis. We can use that to restructure operations and implement new security protocols. They worked through the night, crafting a strategy to protect Monroe Construction, while systematically dismantling Dylan and Sierra's attempts to compete. By dawn, Ethan had a clear plan. The board meeting that morning was brief but productive. Ethan presented evidence of corporate espionage, then outlined his restructuring strategy. The vote was unanimous in his favor. Effective immediately, he said. All departments will undergo security audits. New confidentiality agreements will be required. Anyone found sharing company information with outside parties will face immediate termination and legal action. One board member raised a hand. What about the rumors? About Dylan and Sierra? My personal life is not up for discussion, Ethan said, his tone final. Focus on protecting the company's interests. That's what you're paid to do. Later that week, Ethan met with Megan Bishop, a prominent interior designer recommended by one of his clients. Her reputation for transforming spaces matched his need for change. The office needs a complete overhaul, Ethan explained as he led her through the building. Something that reflects strength, innovation. Megan studied the space with a professional eye. And what about your home? A man's environment shapes his mindset. Ethan hesitated. He hadn't changed anything in the house since Sierra left, letting the rooms collect dust like relics of his failed marriage. Start with the office, he decided. The house can wait. But Megan was persistent. Over the next few weeks, as she transformed the corporate headquarters with clean lines and bold designs, she gradually drew Ethan into conversations about personal renewal. Your workspace reflects your vision, she said one evening as they reviewed material samples. But where do you find peace when the workday ends? Her question struck him harder than she probably intended. Peace had become a foreign concept, replaced by an all-consuming drive for success and vindication. That night, Ethan returned home to find his parents waiting in the driveway. Gavin looked grim, Marquezine worried. We need to talk, Gavin said as Ethan let them in. About the future of the company. If this is about Dylan, Ethan began, but Gavin cut him off. It's about you, Marquezine said, her hand gently resting on his arm. You're working yourself to death, sweetheart. When was the last time you slept more than 4 hours? I'm fine, Ethan replied, stepping away from her touch. The company needs me focused right now. The company needs you healthy, Gavin countered, his voice firm. And thinking clearly. This vendetta against your brother. Vendetta? Ethan let out a harsh laugh. He destroyed my marriage, stole from our company, and now he's trying to ruin everything we've built. This isn't a vendetta, Dad. This is survival. And what about your survival? Marquezine's voice cracked. You're not eating, barely sleeping. The hatred is consuming you. Hatred keeps me sharp, Ethan replied, pouring himself a drink. It keeps me from making the same mistakes again. Trust. Forgiveness. Those are luxuries we can't afford anymore. Gavin stepped closer. Son, we're not asking you to forgive them. What they did was unforgivable. But don't let their betrayal destroy who you are. Who I am, Ethan echoed, setting his glass down with a controlled movement. I'm your son. A Monroe. And Monroes protect what's theirs. Isn't that what you taught me? I taught you to be strong. Gavin agreed, his voice softer. But strength without wisdom becomes tyranny. The words lingered in the air between them, heavy and unresolved. Ethan turned away, staring out the window at the overgrown garden Sierra had once tended. They were wild now, untamed, just like the feelings churning inside him. I have a meeting with Julian tomorrow morning, Ethan said finally, his voice steady. A complete audit of all company projects from the past 5 years. We need to identify any vulnerabilities before Dylan can exploit them. His parents exchanged a look of quiet defeat. They had lost him to his mission of revenge, at least for now. After they left, Ethan walked through the empty house, each room echoing with memories he had to erase. In the study, he found an old photo album, pictures of him and Dylan as children, playing in their father's construction sites, school graduations, family vacations. He closed the album without a second glance. The past was dead. Only the future mattered now. A future he would build on his own terms, without the weakness of trust or the burden of brotherhood. His phone buzzed with a text from Megan, reviewed the design proposals. Ready to start the renovation whenever you are. Ethan looked around the house, feeling the weight of the memories, and made a decision. Both office and home, he texted back. Clean slate. No reminders of the past. He spent the rest of the night in his home office, reviewing documents Julian had prepared. Each page revealed more betrayals, more challenges to overcome. But with every revelation, his resolve only deepened. Dylan and Sierra thought they could build their happiness on the ruins of his trust. He would show them how wrong they were. Monroe Construction wouldn't just survive their betrayal, it would emerge stronger, harder, and unassailable. And Ethan Monroe would never again be vulnerable to the weakness of love or the illusion of loyalty. Chapter 4: Strategic Alliances and Hidden Agendas. Ethan Monroe tapped his pen against a polished conference table at the Willow Creek Chamber of Commerce meeting. His attention wasn't on the speaker discussing local business development, but rather on Elena Reed, the sharp-suited corporate attorney who was presenting statistics on recent litigation trends. Her reputation for ruthlessly dismantling opposing counsel had preceded her. "Thank you for your attention," Elena concluded, gathering her materials. "Any questions?" The room buzzed with movement as attendees began networking. Ethan remained seated, watching Elena expertly deflect attempts at small talk with practiced ease. Once the crowd had thinned, he approached her. "Ms. Reed, your analysis of predatory business practices was fascinating." She studied him carefully, her eyes calculating. "Mr. Monroe, I've been following your company's recent situation with great interest." "Have dinner with me," he said, his tone firm. "Professionally. I have a proposition that might intrigue you." 2 hours later, they sat in a private booth at La Maison, Willow Creek's finest restaurant. Elena wasted no time, cutting straight to the point between bites of coq au vin. "You want revenge," she stated, her voice cool. "But you need it to be legal, sustainable, and absolute." "I want justice," Ethan corrected, though his tight grip on his wine glass betrayed his emotions. "My brother and ex-wife think they can build their success on stolen foundations, and I intend to demolish those foundations." Elena's lips curved in a subtle smile of appreciation. "Tell me about their vulnerabilities." Ethan pulled out a folder. "Dylan's new company relies heavily on 3 major suppliers. Without them, his projects grind to a halt." "Acquisition targets," Elena mused, scanning the documents. "But they'll see you coming." "Not if we use shell corporations and third-party buyers. I'm willing to liquidate personal assets to fund it." Elena's eyes glinted. "Better. Who handles your PR?" "We don't have a dedicated team." "Why?" "Because we need to control the narrative. I know someone, Ava Cole at Willow Creek Lifestyle. She's ambitious, hungry for bigger stories than charity galas and home renovations." "Set up a meeting," Ethan decided. "And Elena, money is no object. I want them destroyed." The next few weeks became a whirlwind of covert meetings and careful preparation. Julian Mosley proved invaluable, providing detailed financial analysis of potential acquisition targets. Each morning, Ethan received updates on Dylan and Sierra's business activities, their client meetings, and their attempts to secure new contracts. "They're planning a major housing development," Julian reported one evening. "Luxury condos on the east side. Who's financing it?" "First National seems interested. They're meeting tomorrow to discuss terms." Ethan smiled coldly. "Call Marcus Ellis at First National. Remind him who financed his brother's restaurant chain when no one else would take the risk." The next day, Dylan and Sierra emerged from First National looking shaken. The pattern repeated across town. Banks suddenly became hesitant. Investors grew cold feet. Elena orchestrated each setback through a web of business relationships and carefully timed revelations. Ava Cole proved to be a masterful ally. Her first article appeared in Willow Creek Lifestyle, Innovation or Imitation? The fine line between inspiration and theft in local architecture. Without naming names, she raised pointed questions about originality and professional ethics, causing Dylan's potential clients to whisper. "They're getting desperate," Julian reported after monitoring their financial transactions. "Dylan tried to access his trust fund yesterday, which has been frozen pending the fraud investigation." Elena added with satisfaction. "They're running out of options." Ethan leaned back in his chair, reviewing the progress they had made. The supplier acquisitions were moving quietly through various shell companies. Banking relationships were being severed systematically. The media was starting to turn against Dylan and Sierra, but it wasn't enough. We need to accelerate, Ethan declared, his voice hard with determination. Elena, prepare the documentation for a hostile takeover. Julian, identify their weakest subcontractors, those who might be willing to spill information about cut corners and safety violations. That's aggressive, Elena warned, her tone cautious. They'll fight back. Let them, Ethan replied, his voice like steel. I've been building this trap for months. It's time to spring it. The team worked late into the night, piecing together their strategy. As Elena reviewed legal documents and Julian compiled financial data, Ethan's phone rang with an unexpected call. Mr. Monroe? A voice on the other end said. This is Owen Clark from the building inspector's office. We've received some concerning reports about projects handled by your company. Really? Ethan's tone remained neutral. That sounds serious. Very, Owen replied. We'll need to conduct thorough inspections at multiple sites. Of course. Public safety is paramount. Ethan muted the phone and turned to his team with a smile. The dominoes are falling. By the end of the month, Dylan and Sierra's company found itself under investigation by 3 regulatory agencies. Their suppliers, now secretly controlled by Ethan, began raising prices and extending delivery times. Clients grew wary, and contracts were cancelled. They're calling it a witch hunt, Ava reported over lunch. Playing the victims. Then let's give them something real to complain about. Ethan replied, his tone cold. How's that investigation into their project safety records coming along? Nearly ready, Elena responded. The evidence from those subcontractors is damning. When this hits, their reputation will be radioactive. The pieces were in place. Ethan stood at his office window, looking out over the city below. Somewhere out there, his brother and ex-wife still believed they could win. They still thought they could escape the consequences of their actions. He would teach them otherwise. His phone buzzed with a message from Elena. Takeover documents ready. Board meeting scheduled for next week. Ethan typed back, proceed. Then he poured himself a drink and smiled. The real battle was about to begin. Chapter 5, The Counterattack and Rising Tensions. The annual Willow Creek Business Symposium buzzed with anticipation. Dylan and Sierra stood at the podium, presenting their revolutionary housing development to hundreds of industry professionals. Dylan exuded confidence as he clicked through his polished slides. Our design philosophy prioritizes innovative living spaces, he declared, gesturing to architectural renderings. Each element carefully crafted too. A murmur rippled through the audience as phones lit up with notifications. Ava Hansen's latest exposé had just gone live, Stolen Dreams. The truth behind Willow Creek's newest development. Dylan faltered mid-sentence as attendees began reading. These allegations are baseless, he protested, but his voice cracked. We have documentation. Elena Reed's voice cut through the chaos as she stood up. Documentation stolen from Monroe construction servers. Would you like me to share the access logs? She asked, her tone cutting and confident. The live stream captured the crisis unfolding in real time. Investors began rising from their seats and walking out. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. Sierra grabbed Dylan's arm, whispering urgently, but the microphones caught her words. We need to leave. Now. Their hasty exit quickly became fodder for local news. Within hours, social media exploded with memes of their retreat. Dylan's attempt to defend himself with a rambling Facebook post accusing Ethan of corporate sabotage backfired when Elena released evidence of their illegal activities. They're planning something, Julian warned Ethan that evening. Dylan withdrew significant cash from their accounts this morning. Let them thrash, Ethan replied, reviewing the surveillance photos. Each move they make digs their grave deeper. Sierra launched their counteroffensive through a carefully orchestrated charity campaign. She organized a gala benefiting women's shelters, positioning herself as a victim of corporate bullying. Local media covered her tearful speech about powerful men abusing their positions. Ethan's response came within hours. Monroe Construction announced a major affordable housing initiative. The project, designed in partnership with Megan Bishop, would provide homes for hundreds of low-income families. The contrast between Sierra's luxury condos and Ethan's community-focused development dominated the headlines. "Your brother's trying to turn your parents against you," Elena reported. "He showed them documents suggesting you're using company resources for personal vengeance. Have our investigators found anything in their financial records?" Ethan asked. "Better," Elena smiled grimly. "We traced wire transfers from the family trust to offshore accounts. Dylan's been embezzling for months." The evidence shattered Dylan's remaining credibility with their parents. Gavin and Marquezine, confronted with proof of their younger son's theft, withdrew their support completely. Dylan's desperation grew visible. During a key supplier meeting, he discovered Monroe Construction had acquired control through shell companies. His attempt to find alternate suppliers failed as word spread about missed payments and broken contracts. "Their cash reserves are almost depleted," Julian reported. "They've started selling personal assets." "Press harder," Ethan commanded. "I want them feeling pressure from all directions." The pressure mounted during a crucial city council meeting. Both companies presented competing project proposals. Dylan's presentation derailed when council members received anonymous tips about safety violations at his previous developments. "These accusations are outrageous," Dylan shouted, lunging at a council member who dared question his integrity. Security quickly intervened as cameras rolled. Sierra attempted damage control through back channels. Her representative approached Elena with an offer: merge the companies, share control, and end the war. "Tell her," Ethan instructed Elena, "that she can dissolve their company and surrender all assets, or face complete destruction. No negotiation." The rejection drove them to increasingly desperate measures. Dylan was caught on camera threatening a building inspector. Sierra's public appearances became increasingly erratic, marked by emotional outbursts and incoherent accusations. "They've lost 3 major clients this week," Julian updated Ethan. "Their project financing is collapsing." Ethan watched their downfall unfold from his office, remembering the betrayal that had started it all. His revenge wasn't just about punishment. It was about justice, about showing the world that actions had consequences. The final blow came unexpectedly. A routine insurance audit revealed systematic fraud in Dylan's completed projects. False claims, inflated costs, faked inspections, the evidence piled up into an irrefutable case. "The regulatory agencies are moving in," Elena announced. "Multiple investigations. Possible criminal charges." "Perfect," Ethan replied, turning away from the window. "Prepare the takeover documents. It's time to end this." Chapter 6: The Gathering Storm. Ethan studied the takeover documents spread across his desk, each page carefully crafted as a weapon of destruction. Elena had outdone herself. The terms appeared generous but stripped Dylan and Sierra of any meaningful control or assets. "The timing is crucial," Elena explained, highlighting key sections. "We move when their main loan payment comes due. Their lender is on board. Fully," she added with a smile. "Amazing how cooperative banks become when presented with evidence of fraud." The plan was executed with precision. Dylan received the takeover offer the morning his lender called in their loans. His desperate call to their lawyer ended quickly. No firm would touch his toxic case. "Mr. Monroe," his secretary buzzed through the intercom. "Your brother's here. He's demanding to see you. Security team in place?" "Yes, sir." "And the recording equipment?" "Active." "Send him in." Dylan burst through the door, his face contorted with rage. "You manipulative bastard! You think you can steal my company?" "Steal?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Like you stole my wife? My clients? My trust?" "That was different." Dylan spat. "Sierra and I love each other. You were ignoring her, focused only on work. And now I'm focused on you." Ethan's voice could have frozen fire. "How's that working out?" Ethan asked, his tone chilling. Dylan slammed his fists onto the desk. "I'll fight this. I'll expose your schemes, Your corporate espionage. Interesting choice of words, Ethan said as he pressed a button, and screens lit up with surveillance footage. Like this scheme? You bribing city officials? Or these construction sites where you cut corners to save money? The color drained from Dylan's face. You've been watching us? I've been hunting you, Ethan replied, standing slowly. And now? I've won. Security arrived to escort Dylan out, his threats echoing down the hallway. Julian entered as they left, carrying fresh reports. Their investors are pulling out. Stock values are plummeting. Julian hesitated. Sierra's been trying to access her old files at the office, looking for leverage. Ethan laughed coldly. She'll find nothing. I purged her access months ago. In the following days, Dylan's camp grew increasingly desperate. Dylan attempted to rally support at an emergency board meeting, presenting manufactured evidence of market manipulation. His performance ended spectacularly when Julian played audio recordings of Dylan's kickback schemes with suppliers. Sierra tried a different approach, filing for emergency custody of their child. Her petition painted Ethan as an obsessed ex-husband destroying their lives out of spite. The court saw through it, Elena reported. Especially after the psychological evaluation showed that the child's distress stemmed from their behavior, not yours. Where are they living now? Ethan asked. That mansion they bought? Julian checked his notes. In foreclosure. They've been trying to sell assets, but our legal holds have frozen most accounts. Ethan implemented the next phase, Operation Phoenix. Monroe Construction began acquiring Dylan's failed projects at bargain prices, announcing plans for rehabilitation and community improvement. Each press release highlighted the contrast between their approaches, further cementing public opinion. Dylan's response shocked even Ethan. Anonymous threats reached Monroe Construction employees, suggesting criminal connections. But Ethan anticipated this. Isaac Wright, head of Ethan's security team, reported. Your brother's meeting with known criminals. Want us to intervene? Isaac asked. Monitor and record, Ethan ordered. Add it to the evidence pile. Meanwhile, Sierra's public unraveling provided its own ammunition. At a charity auction, she verbally attacked a donor who questioned their finances. The viral video showed her transformation from polished professional to raving desperado. The remaining investors are jumping ship, Julian confirmed. Their company's effectively dead. But Ethan wasn't finished. He expanded Monroe Construction's community programs, creating opportunities in areas Dylan had exploited. Local politicians, recognizing the shifting winds, aligned themselves with Ethan's initiatives. Then Elena delivered the coup de grace, comprehensive evidence of insurance fraud. The documentation is solid, Elena said. It details years of systematic deception, with both Dylan and Sierra's signatures on falsified claims. Federal investigators are interested. This goes beyond civil courts now. Ethan reviewed the evidence package. Each page represented another nail in Dylan and Sierra's coffin, a final step toward the complete destruction of their lives and reputations. Winter descended on Willow Creek, matching the frozen wasteland of Dylan and Sierra's future. Their attempts to flee justice were thwarted by Ethan's foresight, travel alerts, frozen accounts, watchful eyes at ports and airports. The final board meeting approached. Ethan stood in his renovated office, surveying the empire he'd protected and strengthened. Dylan and Sierra had tried to take everything from him. Instead, they had given him the motivation to become more powerful than ever. Sir? His assistant interrupted his thoughts. The board members are arriving. Good, Ethan said, straightening his tie. It's time to show them what real power looks like. Chapter 7, The Turning Point. Monroe Construction's headquarters buzzed with anticipation as board members filed into the newly renovated conference room. Gavin Monroe gripped the podium, his knuckles white, while Marquezine sat rigid in her chair. The tension in the room was palpable as Dylan and Sierra slipped in through the back door, taking seats near the exit. This meeting will come to order, Gavin announced, his voice carrying the weight of decades of leadership. He glanced at Ethan, who gave a subtle nod. Today marks a pivotal moment in our company's history. Dylan leaned forward, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. Sierra rested a hand on his arm, both of them exuding confidence despite recent setbacks. Their arrogance would be their downfall. After a long consultation with our legal team, Gavin continued, I am implementing an immediate change in leadership. He pulled out a document. Effective immediately, all company assets and control will transfer to Ethan Monroe. The smirk immediately disappeared from Dylan's face. What? He shot to his feet. You can't do this. Sit down, Mr. Monroe. Elena Reed's voice rang out, cutting through Dylan's protest. She walked up to the board table and began distributing papers to each member. These papers detail the transfer of ownership. All legal requirements have been met. This is a coup. Dylan's face flushed red with fury. He's manipulating you, Dad. Can't you see what he's doing? Dylan's voice was filled with panic. Gavin's expression stiffened. I see perfectly well what everyone has done. The evidence speaks for itself. Julian King stepped forward, holding a thick binder. Shall I outline the financial discrepancies we've uncovered, Mr. Dylan? The fraudulent contracts? The embezzled funds? Those records were confidential. Sierra exploded, her voice laced with fear. But her slip-up didn't go unnoticed. Elena quickly seized the moment. Interesting defense, Mrs. Monroe. So you admit they exist? Ethan remained calm, watching the scene unfold. His face was impassive, but inside, he relished the moment. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail. Each player was exactly where they needed to be. Dylan attempted to change tactics. Think about what you're doing to the family name. The scandal! The scandal you created? Ethan finally spoke, his voice cold as ice. When you stole my wife? When you undermined this company? When you betrayed everything our parents built? You drove her away! Dylan shouted, his voice thick with frustration. You were too focused on work, too blind to see it. Enough. Ethan cut him off, his voice slicing through the chaos. Your theatrics won't work here. The board has seen the evidence. The vote is final. As Ethan finished, security guards appeared at the door. Elena handed out additional papers. These detail the terms of your immediate termination and the dissolution of your competing business interests. You can't just erase us, Sierra protested. Rights? Ethan laughed, the sound bitter. Like the right to steal company secrets? Like the right to endanger lives with substandard construction? To defraud investors? Those are lies. Dylan lunged forward, but security intercepted him. Mr. King? Ethan nodded toward Julian, who activated the projection screen. The video evidence began to play. Dylan accepting bribes, Sierra falsifying inspection documents, both of them scheming in secret meetings. We've documented everything, Ethan said, watching as their faces drained of color. The authorities are very interested in your creative approach to building codes. The board members sat in horrified silence as the evidence unfolded. Gavin and Marquezine turned away, unable to bear watching their younger son's disgrace. This isn't over, Dylan hissed as security began escorting them out. You think you've won? He spat. You've got nothing. Ethan stood, towering over the table. I have everything. The company. Our parents' respect. A clear conscience. His voice dropped even lower. What do you have, brother? A crumbling business built on lies? A relationship founded on betrayal? Sierra, her voice trembling with desperation, tried one final gambit. The child. You wouldn't separate. Your custody hearing is next week. Elena interrupted smoothly, her tone unwavering. The judge will be very interested in the psychological evaluation results. Dylan and Sierra were half-dragged from the room, their protests echoing down the hallway. Outside, camera flashes erupted as Ava Hansen's media team arrived, ready to document their spectacular downfall. Ethan turned back to the remaining board members. Let's discuss the company's future, he said calmly, activating a presentation. I've prepared a detailed restructuring plan. The meeting proceeded efficiently, but beneath his professional demeanor, Ethan savored each moment. Years of planning. Months of strategic maneuvers. All culminating in this flawless execution of justice. Outside, Dylan and Sierra were engulfed in a media storm. Their desperate attempts to spin the situation only dug them deeper, as reporters pounced on the emerging evidence of their criminal activities. Meanwhile, inside, Ethan continued to lay the groundwork for Monroe Construction's new era. Each decision, every policy change, was another brick in the wall between the past and the future. Ethan had torn down their illusions of victory, and was now building something stronger from the ashes of their betrayal. The sun set on Willow Creek as the meeting came to a close. Gavin and Marquezine lingered, torn by the role they had played in this family war. "It had to be done," Ethan said quietly, his voice firm. "The company comes first. Family loyalty must be earned." They nodded, finally understanding that their younger son had forced this outcome through his own actions. The parents who left the building that evening were not the same as those who had entered. Harder. Wiser. Finally seeing the truth about both their sons. Chapter 8: The Web Titans. Elena's heels clicked against the marble floor as she strode into Ethan's office. "The federal agents just left Dylan's house," she said, her voice carrying a hint of satisfaction. "They seized everything: computers, phones, files." Ethan didn't look up from his laptop. "They found more than we expected," Elena continued. "Dylan wasn't just cutting corners on local projects. He'd set up shell companies to launder money through international contracts." Ethan looked up now, his eyes narrowing with a predatory gleam. "Send everything to our contacts at the SEC." "Already done," Elena responded. She placed a USB drive on his desk. "But there's more. Sierra's been embezzling from her women's shelter charity, using donations to fund their lifestyle." "Perfect," Ethan said, his voice calm yet cold. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Get me Ava Cole." Within hours, news vans surrounded Dylan and Sierra's mansion. Federal agents carted out box after box of evidence while reporters shouted questions from every angle. Through his office window, Ethan watched the live stream on multiple screens. "Sir," his assistant interrupted. "Mr. King needs to see you immediately." Julian rushed in, clutching printouts. "They're trying to transfer assets offshore. I caught the transactions just in time." "Block everything," Ethan commanded, his voice sharp. "Lock down their accounts. Freeze their credit lines. I want them desperate." "Already done." Julian's fingers flew over his tablet. "But Dylan made a call to some shady people in the city. Our surveillance team picked it up. Let me guess, trying to hire muscle?" "Worse," Julian replied. "He's offering to expose safety violations in our older projects if we don't back off." Ethan's laugh was cold and humorless. "Send in Isaac." Isaac Wright entered silently, his military bearing evident as he straightened at attention. "Sir? Dylan's making threats. Show him why that's a mistake." "With pleasure." Isaac pulled out his phone and began dispatching orders to his security team. Within hours, Dylan's desperate gambit backfired. His hired thugs were arrested in a coordinated sting operation. Their phones contained recorded evidence of Dylan's solicitation to commit crimes. Each threat he made turned into another weapon in Ethan's arsenal. Meanwhile, Sierra tried to damage control with a tearful TV interview. "Ethan is destroying our family out of spite," she sobbed. "He never understood what real love means." The broadcast cut off abruptly as evidence of her charity fraud hit the news. Videos surfaced showing her spending donation money on luxury spas, fine dining, and exclusive shopping sprees. "Their lawyer quit," Elena reported later. "No one will represent them now." "What about the custody hearing?" "It's scheduled for tomorrow. The psychological evaluation results are devastating. The child shows clear signs of trauma due to their erratic behavior." Ethan nodded calmly. "Make sure Gavin and Marquezine are prepared to take temporary custody." The custody hearing was brutal. Dylan and Sierra's facades cracked under relentless questioning. Their attempts to portray Ethan as the villain crumbled when evidence of their neglect was brought to light: missed doctor's appointments, unexplained absences, and multiple witnesses to their public fights. The court hereby grants temporary custody to Gavin and Marquezine Monroe, the judge announced. Furthermore, given the pending criminal charges, all visitation must be supervised. Sierra's scream echoed through the courthouse. Dylan had to be restrained by bailiffs when he lunged toward Ethan, shouting threats that only served to reinforce the judge's decision. Back at Monroe Construction, Ethan moved forward with the next phase of his strategy. Building inspectors were deployed across all of Dylan's completed projects, armed with anonymous tips detailing specific violations. The results exceeded expectations. 3 buildings evacuated so far, Julian reported. Structural issues, substandard materials, falsified safety certificates. The media's having a field day. Make sure our company handles the renovations, Ethan instructed. Full price, no corners cut. Let's show them the difference between their methods and ours. The contrast proved devastating. Each revelation of Dylan's negligence emphasized Monroe Construction's integrity. Clients flocked to Ethan's company, while Dylan's former customers filed lawsuits. Chapter 9: Redemption and Renewal. The courtroom fell silent as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. After weeks of testimony, dozens of witnesses, and mountains of evidence, justice was on the verge of being served. In the matter of corporate fraud, embezzlement, and criminal negligence, the judge began. This court finds the defendants, Dylan Monroe and Sierra McNamara Monroe, guilty on all counts. Dylan's face turned an ashen shade. Sierra swayed in her seat, the weight of the verdict settling in. Given the severity of these crimes, particularly the willful endangerment of public safety through substandard construction practices, the judge continued, this court sentences Dylan Monroe to 15 years in federal prison. Gasps filled the courtroom. Dylan's legs gave out beneath him, forcing him to grip the defense table for support. Sierra McNamara Monroe, in consideration of your role as primary caregiver and cooperation with authorities, the judge said, this court sentences you to 3 years house arrest with mandatory community service. Ethan watched from the gallery, his expression unchanging. The sentences were not just punishment, they were public proof of his triumph, validation of his tireless pursuit of justice. Additionally, the judge continued, the defendants are ordered to pay restitution totaling $20 million to the affected parties. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Ethan. How do you feel about the verdict? Justice has been served, he replied simply. Monroe Construction will continue focusing on what matters, building quality projects that benefit our community. In the months that followed, Ethan's vision for the company expanded. The community center project, once tainted by Dylan's betrayal, became a symbol of innovation and integrity. Local schools brought students to tour the construction site, learning about ethical business practices firsthand. Gavin and Marquezine thrived in their role as guardians, providing the stability their grandchild so desperately needed. The boy's nightmares subsided, his grades improved, and therapists noted significant positive changes in his behavior. Ethan reshaped the company's culture. New policies were put in place that emphasized transparency and accountability. Employee profit-sharing programs rewarded ethical behavior. The industry took notice. Monroe Construction quickly became a model for corporate responsibility. The latest quarter's results are impressive, Julian announced during a board meeting. Our market share has doubled, and client satisfaction rates are at record highs. And Dylan's former clients? Ethan asked. Most have signed with us. The rest are still in negotiations. The company's success began attracting national attention. Business magazines featured Ethan's leadership style, and universities invited him to speak about corporate ethics. Each public appearance reinforced his triumph over betrayal. One evening, as Ethan worked late in his office, Elena entered with news from prison. Dylan tried to appeal. Failed spectacularly. He's been moved to maximum security after trying to. And Sierra? Struggling under house arrest. Her therapy sessions aren't going well. Let her. Ethan said, his voice hard. He turned back to his work. She has nothing left to threaten us with. The years of planning, the careful accumulation of evidence, the strategic destruction of their lives, it had all paid off. Dylan and Sierra's betrayal had been intended to break him, to bring him down. Instead, it had forged Ethan into something far stronger, more ruthless, unshakable. His revenge wasn't just complete, it was eternal. Long after their prison terms had ended, they would live as pariahs, forever marked by their crimes, haunted by the weight of their choices. Their son would grow up knowing the truth about them, understanding why they lost everything. And Ethan? He stood victorious atop the empire they had tried to steal, his power absolute, his reputation untouchable. He had transformed personal betrayal into professional triumph, emotional pain into corporate success. As the moon rose over Willow Creek, Ethan signed the final documents transferring Dylan's remaining assets to Monroe Construction. In the end, justice wasn't about forgiveness or healing. It had always been about power, taking it, wielding it, using it to ensure that those who betrayed you never had the chance to rise again. Ethan hadn't just survived their betrayal, he had built it into the foundation of his greatest victory. That was true revenge, not just destroying them, but using their downfall to create something greater than they could have ever imagined. The lights of Willow Creek sparkled below his office window, each one symbolizing a life touched by his company's work. He had protected those lives from Dylan's negligence, turned betrayal into benefit, and pain into progress. That was his legacy now. Not the broken trust or the bitter memories, but the empire built from their ashes. An empire that would stand as eternal testimony to a simple truth: betray Ethan Monroe, and you didn't just lose, you ceased to exist. Epilogue, a decade later. The skyline of Willow Creek had undergone a dramatic transformation over the past decade. Monroe Construction's influence now stretched across the city, marked by innovative buildings and community developments that had turned what was once a modest town into a thriving urban center. At the heart of it all stood the Monroe Tower, a 50-story testament to power and precision. Ethan Monroe sat in his top-floor office, reviewing reports from his company's latest international expansion. At 48, his presence commanded even more authority than it had before. Success had honed his features into sharp angles, while his eyes retained their calculating intensity. "Mr. Monroe," his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "The board is ready for your annual address." Ethan gathered his materials, pausing to look at the digital displays covering one wall. Each screen showed real-time data from Monroe Construction projects worldwide. The company had grown exponentially, becoming a global leader in sustainable development and urban renewal. The boardroom fell silent as Ethan entered. Elena Reed, now Chief Legal Officer, sat at his right hand. A decade of shared victories had cemented their professional partnership. Her reputation for ruthless efficiency had grown alongside the company's success. "Our 10th consecutive year of record growth," Ethan began, activating a holographic display. "Monroe Construction now operates in 27 countries, with a market capitalization exceeding $50 billion. The numbers told only part of the story. After Dylan and Sierra's downfall, Ethan had systematically expanded his influence far beyond construction. Monroe Enterprises now included technology firms, financial institutions, and media companies, an empire built on the ashes of betrayal. "And our former competitors?" a board member asked. "There are no former competitors," Elena answered with a cold smile. "Only acquired assets and cautionary tales." Indeed, Dylan's fate had served as a warning to anyone who thought about crossing Monroe Construction. Released from prison after 12 years, Dylan lived in a small, nondescript apartment on the outskirts of town. His attempts to rebuild his life were met with systematic opposition. No construction company would hire him. No bank would fund him. His name had become synonymous with failure. Sierra's story was just as grim. Her house arrest had ended years ago, but her reputation never recovered. She worked part-time at a small marketing firm, her former glamour faded, and her social connections severed. Her charity fraud conviction had made her untouchable in the nonprofit world that she once dominated. Their son, James, now 17, had thrived under Gavin and Marquezine's guardianship. He had inherited his uncle's sharp business sense and had been interning at Monroe Construction during the summers. Ethan had taken a careful interest in his education, ensuring that James understood the cost of betrayal through the example of his parents. "Uncle Ethan," James had asked during a recent meeting, "why do you still block their attempts to rebuild?" "Because actions have eternal consequences," Ethan had replied. "Remember that when you take your place in this company." The lesson had not been lost on the teenager. James excelled in business courses, already showing signs of the Monroe ruthlessness. He maintained minimal contact with his biological parents, knowing that his future lay with the uncle who controlled the family empire. Julian King had risen to chief financial officer, his early loyalty rewarded with substantial power. His financial acumen had helped transform Monroe Construction from a regional player into a global force. The evidence he had gathered against Dylan and Sierra had proven just the beginning of his value to the company. The Monroe Foundation's latest initiative, Julian reported to the board, had funded business ethics programs at 20 major universities. "Our case study on corporate accountability has become standard teaching material." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Ethan had turned his revenge into an educational tool, ensuring future business leaders understood the true cost of betrayal. The program specifically highlighted Dylan and Sierra's downfall, with their names forever linked to failure and disgrace. Megan Bishop had expanded her influence as well. Her design firm, now a Monroe Construction subsidiary, set new industry standards for sustainable architecture. The partnership had proven mutually beneficial, her creativity refined by his strategic vision, her innovations protected by his power. The community center project Megan had presented was designated a historical landmark, and the American Institute of Architects featured it in their centennial exhibition on transformative urban design. What began as a symbol of betrayal now stood as a beacon of triumph. Every year, thousands of visitors toured the building, learning about the Monroe Construction philosophy of integrity and excellence. No mention was made of Dylan or Sierra's involvement in the official histories. Ava Hansen had turned her coverage of the scandal into national prominence. Her media company, backed by Monroe Investments, specialized in investigative business journalism. She maintained a mutually beneficial relationship with Ethan, her network elevating Monroe Construction's successes while exposing competitors' vulnerabilities. "Our latest exposé on industry corruption," she reported in a private meeting, "has already sparked 3 federal investigations. None involving Monroe Properties, of course." Gavin and Marquezine had aged gracefully, their latter years free from the family strife that once defined their lives. They now hosted weekly dinners at the Monroe estate, attended by an inner circle of trusted allies. Dylan and Sierra's names were never mentioned at these gatherings. Their existence had been erased from family photos and conversations. Isaac Wright's security firm had grown into a global operation, providing protection for all Monroe enterprises. His teams kept a constant watch on Dylan and Sierra, ensuring they never regained enough resources or influence to cause trouble. Any attempt to contact former business associates met with a swift, decisive response. "They tried reaching out to an overseas investor last month," Isaac informed Ethan. "The approach was intercepted and discouraged. The message remains clear. No one in the business world would dare risk Monroe Construction's wrath by helping the disgraced couple." Their isolation was both complete and permanent. After the board meeting, Ethan visited the Monroe Construction Training Center. Hundreds of employees were learning company protocols and state-of-the-art facilities. The orientation video prominently featured the company's commitment to ethics, using Dylan and Sierra's case as a stark warning. "Integrity isn't just a policy," Ethan told a group of new hires. "It's the foundation of power. Those who betray that foundation will pay the price, forever." The trainees absorbed his words eagerly, unaware they were hearing a personal manifesto forged in the flames of betrayal. To them, Ethan Monroe was the epitome of business success, his rise to power seemingly untarnished by time or conflict. But in his private moments, Ethan sometimes revisited footage from the years of revenge, the boardroom confrontation, the court proceedings, the media coverage of Dylan and Sierra's downfall. Each video preserved in high definition, a digital monument to justice served. These were not moments of weakness or regret. Rather, they solidified his understanding of power and its consequences. The betrayal that might have destroyed him had instead forged something invincible, a man who turned personal pain into professional dominance. His marriage to Sierra and brotherhood with Dylan had died, but the lessons lived on. Trust was a weapon. Loyalty had to be enforced. Power, once obtained, must be wielded to prevent betrayal from ever succeeding. As the sun set over Willow Creek, Ethan reviewed plans for the company's next decade. Monroe Construction would continue to expand, absorbing competitors, strengthening its global market dominance. Each new project would bury the past deeper beneath layers of success. James would eventually take his place in the company hierarchy, groomed to carry forward the Monroe legacy of power and retribution. The boy's parents would watch from their forced poverty as their son inherited the empire their betrayal had helped create. This, Ethan realized, was his ultimate victory, not just in destroying those who betrayed him, but ensuring that their destruction served as an eternal lesson. His revenge hadn't ended with their conviction. It had lived on in every Monroe construction project, every business deal, every demonstration of power. Dylan and Sierra had tried to steal his company, destroy his life. Instead, they had helped create something far greater, a dynasty built on the principle that betrayal carried infinite costs. Their suffering would endure as long as Monroe Construction existed, their story a perpetual warning to anyone who considered crossing the man who had turned revenge into empire. The lights of Monroe Tower illuminated the city as Ethan finalized his plans. In the years since justice had been served, he had turned a regional construction company into a global force. Personal betrayal had become professional legend. Private pain had been converted into public power. That was the true legacy of Dylan and Sierra's betrayal. Not the pain they caused, but the empire it created. An empire built on the unshakable truth that once trust is broken, it can never be restored. An empire that would stand for generations as a testament to this reality. Crossing Ethan Monroe didn't just end careers or destroy lives. It created legends of failure that would be remembered for as long as his success endured. As the night fell over Willow Creek, Ethan sat in the heart of Monroe Tower, smiling to himself. He had achieved something greater than mere revenge. He had turned betrayal into destiny, personal hatred into professional domination. The company Dylan and Sierra had tried to steal now shaped the world. While they lived in the shadows of its success, their legacy was one of eternal treachery. That was justice, not just punishment, but perpetual consequence. Not just revenge, but a timeless reminder. The betrayed had become the betrayer's nightmare, their downfall forever tied to his ascension. In the end, Ethan hadn't just survived their treachery. He had turned it into the foundation of an empire that would outlive them all. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen and I will see you there.